Revolution and Reverie, Paris Opera Ballet's Sleeping Beauty at the Bastille. Seeing the Paris Opera Ballet in the Sleeping Beauty, or La Belle au Bois Dormant, is to look down history's kaleidoscopic tunnel. A deluge of rotating tutus, rising monarchies, falling empires, exiled artists, fairy tales, and waves of Russian, French, and Soviet history are embedded in the costumes of fairies, pages, and princesses. At the same time, it's a conversation in contradictions. This most opulent and classical of ballets, based on a fairy tale written in 1697 by Charles Perrault as an homage to the French monarchy, is performed not in the traditional 150-year-old Palais Garnier theater, but in the modern, cold, cool, and stark Bastille, a theater inaugurated in the commemoration of the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution. Here, we have a ballet revering the ideals of an antiquated state in a theater built to commend and commemorate the revolution. The story was originally adopted by the Imperial Russian court during a surge in nationalism following the 1881 assassination of Tsar Alexander II, the last reforming Tsar. The state was bracing against revolution, holding tighter to the myths of divine monarchy. Will we ever learn? Layered onto that is the later history of revolution and Rudolf Nureyev's defection and subsequent exile. The original choreography is by the prolific Marius Petipa, and while the overall structure and iconic scenes remain, like the Rose Adagio and the fairy variations in the prologue, the version the Paris Opera Ballet performs is by Nureyev, who served as artistic director of the company from 1983 to 1989. During his tenure, he staged his own versions of many classics and commissioned major contemporary works like William Forsythe's In the Middle Somewhat Elevated in 1987, and he famously promoted Sylvie Guillem to the rank of étoile at the age of 19 in 1984, unorthodoxly leapfrogging her over several ranks. Nureyev was a beloved star in the Soviet Union. He defected in June 1961 while on tour in Paris, landing in a life of both freedom and near permanent estrangement. His dramatic escape humiliated the Soviet state, a stain on their propaganda project. If Soviet society was so superior, why were its greatest artists fleeing? His family was harassed. His father's military career was reportedly destroyed. While countless serfs had suffered under the czars, many, including Nureyev, also suffered under the Soviet regime, and ironically carried with them a complex nostalgia for the era that preceded it. That longing is felt in Nureyev's Sleeping Beauty, a staging that honors the fairy tale's monarchical origins, perhaps also mourning a vanished imperial Russia. Before we get into the review, a huge thank you to this episode's sponsor, Marquee TV, my absolute number one favorite streaming platform. They have hundreds of classical and contemporary dance titles, including 6 different versions of the Sleeping Beauty, among them the Royal Ballet, Australian Ballet, David Hallberg with the Bolshoi, and Matthew Bourne's version of Sleeping Beauty. You can subscribe at the link in my bio or the show notes. Now, on to the review. The Prelude, A Cursed Blessing. The Prelude is the most famous part of the Sleeping Beauty, the moment when fairies gather to bestow gifts upon the newborn Princess Aurora. Grace, beauty, courage, song, all the things a princess needs to function as an aspirational member of society. It's also where the point of tension is introduced, and Carabos, the malevolent fairy left off the invitation list, crashes the celebration and curses Aurora to die at 16, just as she would be preparing to enter society. Carabos is often played with more than a touch of theatrical humor, a serious threat, certainly, but sometimes camp or caricature, depending on the company and the dancer. At Paris Opera Ballet, her menace is quieter and more elegant. Fanny Gorse plays her as an understated danger, like a well-heeled politician whose destructive power lies beneath a facade of stately refinement. There's some irony, as there always is in this role, but Gorse gives us a Carabos who could have been just like the other fairies, had life unfolded differently. Instead, her powers are putrefied in malice. Technical purity, Parisian control. Technically speaking, Sleeping Beauty is considered the purest of the classical ballets. The choreography is crystalline. There's nowhere to hide. Unlike Swan Lake, for example, where dramatic flair can mask a slip in form, or a slip in form can intentionally enhance the dramatic. Sleeping Beauty demands absolute clarity, making it the perfect showcase for a ballet company's stylistic identity and technical level. And Paris Ballet's contained elegance can sometimes mute the dancer's full virtuosity. In Sleeping Beauty, this quality becomes an asset, but occasionally dancers burst through their refinement. In this performance, two stood out. One, Laudeline Shore, a quadrille, the company's lowest rank, shown in the third fairy variation. Paris Opera simply numbers the variations in the prelude rather than listing the symbolic gifts. Shore's presence extended far beyond her rank. Her grasp of the layered musical and choreographic texture was complete, filling the theater with an authority that suggests she's destined to rise. Another standout was Ho Young Kang, a premiere danseuse, the rank just below étoile, who performed the sixth variation, typically the Lilac Fairies solo. Kang is part of a stellar wave of Korean dancers flooding the ballet world. Paris Opera, once known for its insularity, is becoming more and more international, and Kang, a radiant and technically refined artist, is a clear example of that shift. Her rise has been swift and well-earned. The Lilac Fairy is the guiding thread of the ballet, and in this version she is presented less as a mythical being and more as a dignified woman of royal power. She wears heels and a gown, not a tutu, honored not as a fantasy, but as a commanding regal figure. And Lucy Fenwick, also a quadrille, brings charm and poise to the role. Yet between the Regency costume and the narrative constraints, the role reads more as a character archetype than a fully expressive part. Act 1. Politics and Pirouettes. Act 1 begins with a little prelude of its own. The king, determined to avoid his daughter's doomed fate, issues a kingdom-wide ban on spindles. In an act of enforcement, peasants caught with spindle needles are threatened with death, heads and hands locked into contraptions awaiting execution, until the queen mercifully intervenes. A funny thing to ponder when sitting in the theater that was built to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary of the French Revolution. Then, the moment everyone waits for, the entrance of Princess Aurora. It's her 16th birthday, the moment of her societal debut, and also the moment she becomes a pawn in dynastic matchmaking. Valentine Elisant is a powerful and gracious Aurora. Her innocence is suited to a ballerina of her stature. She gives us not the sprightly debutante, but the woman Aurora will become at 25, at 35. Her naivete has been absorbed in time, and we love her for it. This complexity adds richness to the famed Rose Adagio, where 4 princes each offer her a rose as she performs one of ballet's most demanding sequences. Extended balances and attitude, which is the leg lifted in the back, bent at a 90-degree angle, while changing partners mid-pose. In this scene, Carabos reappears to fulfill her prophecy. Disguised, barely, in the same costume as the prelude, with only a billowing cape to cover her, and she lures the unsuspecting Aurora into pricking her finger. It's hard to imagine the princess falling for the ruse, but it works, and the plot moves forward. The dream scene. Ballet as impressionism. What follows is one of ballet's more visually arresting sequences. Paris Opera's staging is narcotically beautiful. If Monet's Water Lilies became a ballet, this would be it. Prince Désiré, danced by the delicate and exacting premier danseur Thomas Dauquer, is first seen on a royal hunt, distracted by flirtation with a radiant countess, a glimpse at paths not taken. The lilac fairy appears, leading him to a vision of Aurora, his ideal woman. Here, the corps de ballet proves its power. It's very easy to think of ballet as an art form represented by its stars and soloists, but it's often the corps de ballet that has the most powerful effect, and this is one of those times. When the cosmic geometry of the group washes over our eyes in a visual and musical poem that, unlike most of the ballet, is a section that could stand on its own outside of any narrative context. And yet, the most breathtaking scene in the ballet, at least in this particular version, for you won't see it in quite the same way anywhere else, comes at the start of Act 3, the wedding act. A princess kissed, a curse broken, a prophecy fulfilled. We, the audience and the characters, are ready for a party. The curtain lifts and a simple yet surprising tableau of the royal court in suspended motion evokes an audible gasp from the entire audience. Many of the dancers have their backs to the house. It's a moment of such subtle and completely unassuming visual beauty, one that serves neither story nor character, a distilled impression of the royal spirit. In this single gesture, we feel unequivocally Nureyev's reverence for this ballet, for the comportment and order that the theater demands, for the nostalgia of a royal Russia, and with our lost breath, we agree with him. Bluebird and Cattails. The Bluebird pas de deux, one of ballet's most iconic interludes, is a coveted opportunity for rising and established dancers. It's familiar to most ballet goers, adding to the pressure. Audiences know how it should look. Théo Gilbert Corfée delivered a convincing Bluebird, while Elizabeth Partington danced Princess Florine with a bright, spirited movement quality and clean lines, although she constantly threatened to get behind the music, which was somewhat nerve-wracking but also added to the excitement, until she actually did get behind the music with one too many revolutions and a pirouette. A lament you'll hear about this generation of dancers is that their technique is so phenomenal, which it is, that artistic and musical nuances are often sacrificed to their athletic prowess. It's a complaint I usually find exaggerated, but not in this instance. And Little Red Riding Hood, an audience favorite, is absent altogether. Final thoughts. Whatever one might think of any specific dancer or interpretation or preference for one or other production, The Sleeping Beauty is for many reasons a pivotal work in the art form's evolution and can be absorbed and enjoyed as both an exercise in archival research and a wonderland for the eyes and the ears, especially on a company like the Paris Opera, whose history and hierarchies are housed in the bodies of its dancers. Sleeping Beauty is now running through July 14th at the Opera. And if you can't make it to a live show, or if you want to compare versions, you can subscribe to the arts-only streaming platform Marquee TV. Link in the bio or in the show notes. Thanks for listening. I'm Cynthia Dragoni, The Dance Lens.